Hello humans, it's just Martine, and today we're going to be reading books that became musicals. I am a theater kid. I've been a theater kid. I love me a musical. Love me a musical. And guess what? I'm a bookish girly. Love me a book. There are so many books that have been adapted into musicals or that have inspired musicals. I'm gonna read some of them today. Not Les Mis. I read Les Mis years ago. Thank goodness. Because if I hadn't read Les Mis years ago, I would feel the need to read it for this. So I'm just glad I'd already read it. We've got a mix. We have some books that are shows I've never seen, only listened to. There are some that I've been obsessed with for a long time. There are some that were maybe a mistake to read. We have the whole gamut. Let's do this. The first book that I read for this was Matilda by Roald Dahl. I'm giving this 4 stars. It was like a really fun, quirky childhood book. I think I watched parts of the original Matilda movie growing up, but I've never seen the musical. I know a couple songs from it. Before this video is up, I want to watch the Netflix version of this musical to like see the whole musical, you know? And now that I've read this book, I'm extra excited about that. Like, I was always excited to see that musical, but I always put it off, couldn't figure out why. And I think in reading this, I understand why. It's because I genuinely didn't understand like what it would be like as a musical, and from the songs that I had heard from it, I was like, what is this plot, you know? And so reading it and going, oh, this would have led the creators to write this song that I know or something, I think makes it a lot more of a magical experience. I did read the book and it was a fun time. If you don't know, Matilda is a story of the girl Matilda. She grows up in a family. They're kind of a terrible family. She's a very, very precocious young girl, and there are just like a lot of mean adults around her, and so she's navigating that, and then she gets to know her kindergarten teacher who realizes how great Matilda is, and they form this like bond. That's it. It was overall a good time, really quick read, so if you haven't read it, I recommend it. Out of the books that I'm reading for this video, the next book that I'm going to talk to you about is the only one that I've like seen live in person on Broadway, and that is The Color Purple. And I'm giving this 4 stars. I'm like waffling between a 3.5 and 4, but I think I'm just gonna go with a 4. I'm going to talk both about my experience with the musical and also the book. Reading the book was interesting because I remembered almost nothing about what happened. And the reason behind that is that when I went to see The Color Purple on Broadway, we were in like the last row of the theater. And so we could generally see things, but like not as well as I would have liked to. But the bigger problem for understanding the story was that whoever had checked their mics for the day had set levels that were way too high. So everyone's mic was like blasting my ears out, and I couldn't focus on anything else but the fact that I was like actively losing my hearing. They were incredible singers, and that's why it was so sad that like their mics were just doing such a bad job. Like, they were loud enough singers, you can turn those mics down. So it was kind of pleasant reading this and finding out what happens. I just don't think it's ever been talked about in my life to me about this as a queer story, which it is. It is 100% a queer story. More than that, it's like a lesbian story. Well, I guess there's also like a bi character who's like pretty prevalent, but the character that we're reading from seems to identify as lesbian. And like when I was looking it up halfway through reading the book, like this is a big piece of lesbian literature and I had no idea. So loved that about it. In this one, it's kind of told in like an epistolary style where it's letters kind of back and forth. So like half the time it's back and forth. The point is it's letters. It's written in letters, and most of them are from the main character Celie, and they are addressed to God. But then there reaches a point where she's mainly writing to her sister Nettie, and Nettie is also writing to her. And so you see those both. But like the overarching book, she's writing to God, and she's just talking about her life and the experiences that she's having. Really dark experiences. Definitely look up trigger warnings. I mean, she's not living at a great time in America to be a Black woman. Is there ever a great time in America to be a Black woman? I don't think there has ever been a good time for that. She's struggling with that, and then it's made even worse by like some of the specific situations that she's put into. So with like her dad, some terrible things happen, and like the husband that she's basically given to, that's not a good situation, and all that stuff. And so you have this person who's like really beaten down by life, and then into her life waltzes Shug Avery. She's like a singer, a performer. They begin talking and like starting this friendship. And I think one of the things that I loved most about this book, aside from how queer it was, were the discussions around theology. I always really love reading that in books. I find it fascinating to see like how other people consider the divine. And I think this was also very much a story of like losing and finding faith in different ways. And I mean, the foreword by the author was talking about the experience when slaves came to America of being forced into Christianity, all of the weird things that came along with that. And that was discussed a lot in the book, especially through the discussions of like a white god and all of those things. And I just thought those were such valuable and insightful and interesting conversations. I really, really liked that about it. But obviously it wasn't perfect to me because I'm waffling between a 3.5 and a 4, but ultimately giving it a 4 is still an excellent rating, but not a 5, because there were moments of the story that just lost me. Like there were a couple times I had to go back and read and be like, wait, what happened? Because I didn't get it. Or like in the beginning, some things happened. I had to Google and be like, plot summary of The Color Purple, and look at it and be like, oh yeah, so I was right. That's what happened. I really loved like the sister relationship in this. I love the discussions of the divine. It's just a really good book. Like it's a classic for a reason. And I'm even more excited about this as a musical because it's getting another movie adaptation this year. I'm not sure if this video is coming out in 2023 or 2024, but either way, I think the movie has already come out. It's coming out like a couple months from when I'm filming this. So I'm really looking forward to that. I'm really hopeful for this new adaptation because one thing that I was reading online is that like the original movie adaptation basically took away most of the queer like plotline and identity in this book. They say that the musical does that better, and so people are kind of hoping that this new adaptation will do a good job of addressing that because it truly is a really, really important part of the book, and people have just like thrown it away to pretend like it's not there when it is. So yeah, really glad I gave this one a read. I finished reading Wicked by Gregory Maguire, and I have some thoughts about this because it's not my first Gregory Maguire. I have previously given 5 stars to a Gregory Maguire book, so I think I came into this with really high hopes. I grew up loving the songs from the musical. I also have previously loved a Gregory Maguire book. So the combination, I was like, this is for sure gonna be a winner for me. And then it was like, it was pretty good, but it wasn't incredible. I'm giving it 3.5 stars. I have a couple thoughts about this. In this one, it's like the story of how the Wicked Witch of the West becomes the Wicked Witch of the West. So it's like a prequel / retelling of The Wizard of Oz, because technically the events of The Wizard of Oz do happen in the course of this book, but they're only a very small part of it. It's like much larger than that. And that's the case with the musical too. I think one thing that really shook me to my core about this was that this book is so different from the musical. Full transparency, I haven't actually watched the full musical. I've listened to the soundtrack so many times, and I generally thought I knew what happened in the musical. And then reading this book gaslit me into thinking I had no idea about what happened in the musical. I had a chance to see the musical one time on Broadway, but we had a choice between 2 musicals at the time. You could either see like The Lion King or you could see Wicked, and so it had been like one of my childhood dreams to go see The Lion King on Broadway, so I went and saw that instead. And so reading this book, I was like, maybe I've always had a misunderstanding about what happens in the musical, because it is one of those musicals where even when you listen to the soundtrack a bunch of times, you are missing a ton of dialogue. And so after I read this book, I went and reread the synopsis for the musical, and I was not missing anything about what happens in the musical. I totally understood what happened in the musical. This book is just very different from that. At its core, it's basically the same. We're following Elphaba. She is born green. Her life is hard. She goes to this school called Shiz University, and she becomes roommates with Galinda, who ends up becoming Glinda the Good Witch, and things kind of go from there. I can't even tell you all the things that were so different from the musical because that would be spoiling both the musical and the book. It wouldn't just be spoiling one thing. But let me tell you, like a lot of stuff that I really liked about the musical is not true of the book. So this is one of those situations in which somebody has adapted an original source work. They've taken Wicked, they adapted it into the musical Wicked, and I think improved vastly upon it. I think it's a lot more compelling the way that it's written for the musical. Hats off to the creative team that did that, because I would have never read this book and been like, I know exactly how to change it to make it a show-stopping musical, but they so did. They changed the way that the different characters relate to one another so that some characters have more significance than they do in the book or are clearer than in the book. They have literal things that happen in the musical that advance the plot so much and in much clearer ways that don't happen in the book. What you get from the musical is this very clear idea that evil or wickedness kind of depends on who's telling the story. And you do kind of get that in the case of the book too, but you're missing so many of the things that drive that theme home in the book, and so I don't think it landed in nearly the same way. And interestingly enough, I wouldn't classify the book as a political fantasy, but maybe I would. Like, it had a lot more politics than I thought it would going in. The musical has some politics about like rights and stuff like that, but this had like a lot. It was the main thing. And Elphaba is like a bit radical in the musical. Like, she does some things that they don't like that obviously give her the title the Wicked Witch of the West, but in this one it's like so much more than that. She's a true like radical revolutionary actor, which is weird. It's kind of like the experience of like reading about, this is going to be such a weird comparison, it's kind of like the difference between reading about Jesus's life in like a children's Bible and watching like Jesus Christ Superstar, wherein in one it's just like a lot clearer how radical the person was. That it's the same thing I got with Wicked. In the book, it's a lot clearer how much of a radical Elphaba is, but also her radical acts hardly advance the plot. And in fact, we're sitting in this larger plot that we never see the result of, whereas it's a lot more contained in the musical in a way that makes sense. So overall, I'm really glad that I read this. I learned a lot reading this, in spite of it gaslighting me. And I found it really interesting to think about the things they did and did not keep or change, and the ways that they turned this into a musical. So overall, that was the fun thing about this practice, and so it met that objective. I finished reading Alexander Hamilton by Ron Chernow, and I'm giving it 3.5 stars. It's an incredibly done biography, like so well done. I just hate biographies, and I knew that going in, but I wanted to say that I had done this for this video, so I did it. And I do think, at least with the purpose of this video, it was more interesting reading this book than otherwise, because I do think for me the interesting part of the book was reading it and thinking about Lin-Manuel's thought process as he like decided he wanted to make a musical about this person and then proceeded to do so. It is such a huge book, I cannot wrap my head around the idea that he just randomly chose it to bring on a vacation with him. Like, what was he thinking? And then to be reading it and be like, you know what? Like, that's just so random to me. I do think it was very obvious to me which parts of the book had things that Lin-Manuel thought were actually interesting, because he turned those things into parts in the musical. And then there were large sections that he was clearly like, this is not as interesting, so he cut them out. I'm mainly talking about like how deep into the Treasury Secretary stuff we got at some points. I mean, the bits about yellow fever and the like creation of the standing army that then got disbanded and all that stuff, like that was left out. So it was interesting to learn some things I didn't already know, although some of those sections were more boring, which is why they were not included in the musical. But then there were other things that were so clearly inspiring to Lin-Manuel Miranda. Like, there was one section of the book, it was during the Revolution, that I read and I was just like, I can see how he made this whole section into one song. It was basically Right Hand Man. Like, it was a long section and I could just see him taking things from it. The same thing happened with a song that's later in Act 1, Nonstop, which does cover like a lot of ground, but I could just see Lin-Manuel like taking certain things out. And I do think one of the cool things about reading this was that I got to see which lines in the musical are direct Hamilton quotes. Like, I would have never known when they had taken things from direct Hamilton like letters and documents. And I thought that was really cool because it wasn't always where you would expect. Like, Lin-Manuel Miranda just did such a great job making it an obvious part of the song that like you had no idea it was an actual quote. And so reading them was very gratifying and being like, oh my gosh, that's a line! That's so cool! If you are a person who really likes biographies or likes learning about the early United States, then I definitely recommend this book. It's a chunker, but it's so well done. Like, there are so many things I learned about context that I can then think about and see how they influenced things in the future and then the present of the country, which is terrifying and intriguing all at the same time. And I really loved how the narrative Ron Chernow built showed us those things and showed us the way that Hamilton sat among all of those things. It was just really, really cool. Happy to say I'm finished with that. From our opening number to the final act and encore, this vlog is done. I have read these books. I am happy with the outcome. I am just proud that I finished Hamilton in time for this to post. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a big thumbs up and comment down below what is your favorite book that has been turned into a musical, or what is your favorite musical, and subscribe for more reading, writing, and college lifestyle content. And until next time, bye humans, bye!